Happy Easter! Welcome to part 3 of our at-home floral design series. Hope you guys have enjoyed what we've put together so far. If you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 of the series, definitely start there because we talk about the beginning stages before we actually do the design, which is of course the fun part. So the first part is covering the supplies that we're going to use, and then the second part covers picking out flowers from the grocery store. Since we're doing this at-home floral design during a quarantine period, we're really looking to make the most of what we're able to forage from our home, from the grocery store, from our garage, and no doubt it will still turn out perfectly beautiful. So with that, we'll get started. I hope everybody's having a great Easter and making the most of the day. We spent the morning with our dogs on the beach, which was a perfect way to start the day. And I figured since we would have been with my family in Providence for brunch, while we're not there, I figured a little morning cocktail wouldn't hurt. So we have mimosas as well, and now we get to have some floral fun. So hopefully you guys are doing the same, or whenever you're tuning in, hope you find these tips helpful. And let's get started. So what I really like to do when I'm picking out a vase to pair with the flowers that I'm going to be arranging is I like to have a good balance between hard and soft. So because I'm using a really soft pastel color palette for Easter flowers, I'm choosing a vase that is a little more hard, structured, and a darker color. So if you like something that's overall a little more light, uplifting, by all means you could choose something that's a lighter color, like a whitish kind of hue here. So, but this is what we'll be using today. So the first step is to determine how you want to create a base for how the flowers are going to lay in the vase. So there's a couple different ways depending on what tools you may have available. And again, we can really make whatever tools you have or don't have work. So what I would say is, my favorite trick for really helping to secure the flowers in the vase is to use chicken wire. So chicken wire obviously comes in a much bigger kind of roll, and what I do is actually snip it to the size of my vase. So the way that I do that is I will actually just see approximately how wide the vase is, cut a piece of chicken wire, and then loop it together and just use the rough edges to kind of twist it around to secure it into this fashion. There's no perfect way to do this. It's just a really rough kind of job, and be careful obviously because the chicken wire is a little tough on your fingers. So then you're just going to nestle that inside of your vase, and it's going to look like this. What's great about this is then the stems can go in through one hole and then another hole at the bottom. If you just have a small piece of chicken wire, you can just make it go like this, so it's just one-sided, plop it on top there, and that's perfectly fine too. What's nice about having the other layer on the bottom is that it provides even more structure, so that if you're trying to do something taller, then it really provides extra structure for the stems to go through. So I really love that. The other thing that you can do, if you have this floral tape, which is water resistant, you can get it at Michael's. I linked it in my last video on supplies. You can actually just tape a rough floral grid across. So just, tape it twice this way and then twice this way. You kind of get the idea. It can hang off the edges a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that because you're going to end up covering any tape marks with the flowers that kind of fall over the vase, so don't worry about any tape on the edge. It has to be water resistant. I promise you, I've tried Scotch tape, it does not work. And last but not least, if you don't have either of those available, it's totally fine. You can actually just create a structure for your flowers to sit on by crisscrossing the stems in the base of your vase. So when you start with the greens, for example, you'll just, put a green here and one here and make an X at the bottom of your vase so that every flower that comes after that will have something to lay on. So that's another great way if you don't have anything available for the structure to really make it work. So with that, you're starting with your vase. You're gonna take your flower food packet, which either came with your flowers or you picked some up. You're gonna put the flower food in. I promise the flower food does really actually help extend the life of the flowers. So you're gonna add that. I always, by the way, keep a bucket right next to me when I'm doing this just to help clean kind of as I go, because it's just a lot easier than creating something beautiful and then at the end being like, oh my gosh, I just made like a bomb in the middle of my dining room. And then pour some water. So for water temperature, cold water is going to be your best bet. That said, if your flowers are really closed up, for example, roses, when they come, the freshest roses are going to be really tightly, the buds are going to be really tight. That actually is best case scenario because they're the most fresh at that point. If you want your flowers to look perfect for an event that you're hosting at your house, you're going to want those petals open a little bit more. When you have a flower like a rose that has a hardier kind of woody stem to it, same goes for like a branch. If you want it to open up more, you can actually put it in warm water and it will really help to kind of open that bloom up. Don't do that with softer blooms. So something like a ranunculus, just keep it in cold water because the warm water is going to do more harm than good there. And then next you're going to want to determine if your arrangement is going to be a front-facing arrangement, which means that you're focusing on the design showing on one side and you're not worried about what the other side looks like. So for example, if it's on, a table that's up against a wall, you're not going to worry what the other side looks like. If, for example, you're doing a centerpiece where it's going to be in the middle of your dining room table, you're going to want it to look the same at all angles. So that's definitely something you're going to want to decide very early on because it will inform the way that you're going to design the flowers in the arrangement. So I haven't 100% decided which version I'm going to do because either could work for where I'm going to put it in my home. So I will most likely do a front facing, but I guess you'll find out as we go along. So with that, we're going to get started. So the very first thing that you're going to put at the base of your arrangement is your greens. So I'm going to go through each flower and also show you how to do the prep work for that flower. What I personally like to do, because the design part is obviously the most fun, I like to prep all my flowers first and then leave the design until last, but you can do it however you'd like. I have prepped the majority of the flowers that I'm going to be using today, but then I've left a few stems unprepped so I can show you what I did to them. So first we're going to start with greens, and that's going to be the base of your arrangement. You can always add some more greens at the end as well. So oftentimes your greens are not going to require too much work. The key is that, and this applies not only to the greens but to all of the flowers, you don't want any leaves to be on the stem if they're going to go into the water. Contamination in the water is the biggest way to kill your floral arrangement quickly. So, and I didn't mention this earlier, another point is to make sure that your vase is very clean before you get started. Put a little soapy water, make sure it's super clean, just because you don't want to go through all of this and then have your flowers dying really quickly. So with this particular green, there's not too much I need to clean up. This is actually literally how it comes. So it's pretty simple and really very minimal prep. So then what you're going to do is you're going to cut every flower that you cut, you're going to cut at a 45-degree angle. The reason for that is that you want more surface area that the water can get in up to the bloom. And use a sharp pair of shears, whatever you happen to have. Scissors are fine too if that's all you have. The other tip, which I'm sure sounds pretty obvious but is always helpful to mention in the beginning, is that better to cut something where it's going to be too long for what you need than to cut it too short, because obviously at that point you can't really recover from that. So I'm going to make sure that because my vase has a seam in it, that the seam is to the back, that I'm aware of where that seam is. And I'll be twisting the arrangement throughout to kind of show you what I'm doing. And everything with the floral arranging process is really more art than science. So I give you some general tips and tricks, but the reality is I continuously move things around in my arrangement as I'm building them. Because the other thing is, even if you have a structure like a chicken wire in there, things are still gonna move a little bit and shift, especially as you add more flowers, because more structure is getting added and it kind of tilts things one way or another. So don't feel like, if it doesn't feel like it's coming together in the beginning, I assure you it will, and you can always move things around. So what I'm gonna do is start with my greens and create a little bit of a base. I don't use all my greens in the beginning because you may want to use it at the end for a little bit of filler as well. I really like this particular green for Easter because it kind of looks like grass, that fake grass that you would put in an Easter basket for a kid. You can also, if you're trimming things off, and you get a really cute, like nice looking one that you trimmed off, you can always save that for later and use that as filler. Because sometimes it just doesn't look right in that moment, but it could be a good filler for later. The other design rule that I try to follow as much as possible is to do things in odd numbers. So it helps the kind of visual effect to not have everything in even numbers. So a general rule of thumb is to do odds. Okay, and then I'm going to add some leafy greens. As I mentioned in my last video, I wasn't able to get a ton of greens when I went to the store, so this is going to be a more kind of floral heavy arrangement, which is nice, but also more expensive. If you can get your hands on more greens, it definitely helps to make the arrangement a little bit more economical when you're making it for yourself at home. Greens are a great filler. So what I am predominantly doing with these greens is putting them around the perimeter. The nice thing about these particular greens is that the leaves are actually really high up on the stem, so I'm not having to do a lot of cleanup to prep, which is great. Okay, so you're seeing here the base with the flowers mostly around the perimeter there. Okay. From there, you're going to start with one of your filler flowers that's going to create a lot of structure in the arrangement. So I mentioned in the last video that roses are a great solution for that. Lisianthus is another great solution for that. So we're going to actually start with our roses, and I'll show you how you prep roses as well. So one thing I really love and find super useful is you can actually get a rose stripper on Amazon, and I linked that in the supplies video as well. It's really nice because it makes something like rose cleanup really quick and easy. It'll take off the leaves, it'll take off the thorns if there are any thorns. The roses I happened to get were actually really not very thorny at all, which is awesome. So these are actually really easy to clean up, but just to show you, you actually just start at the top here if you get one, and you run it the length, and it's taken all of those thorns and leaves off, which is awesome. If you want to leave a couple leaves at the top, you can do that. I personally don't like to, because sometimes, you know, the leaves will eventually start to look kind of crummy as time goes on. Then the other thing you're going to want to do with a rose, sometimes the outer petals will start looking a little brown. They might look a little dingy, and the reality is that oftentimes roses are traveling pretty far to get to us, usually from like Ecuador, and so the outer petals that are really protecting the rose are going to start to look dingy, but it's nothing to do with the actual rose itself, which is quite beautiful in the middle. So you can actually literally just peel any dingy looking petals off. I just touch the petals that I know I'm going to remove. I don't touch the other petals because the oil from your hands is going to negatively affect the flower. And then another cool trick is that you can just blow into the center of the rose into kind of a circular motion, and it'll help to open it up without really touching the flower, which is great. So it kind of opens the petals there, which is really pretty. I love the color that these particular flowers came in. It's such like a soft, perfect color for Easter. It's like a dusty, dusty pink. So then I'm going to trim them. One of the things that I also recommend to make sure that you have a really layered look within your arrangement is you're going to want to cut all of the stems at varying lengths. You don't want them to all be the same, or you're going to have a rather flat arrangement, which is, if that's what you're going for, that's totally fine. But if you want something that's got a little more dimension and depth, and particularly if you're looking to do a front-facing arrangement, you're going to want to have more dimension. So definitely look to cut the stems at different lengths. And again, cut it longer than you think it needs to be. You can always adjust it. The other tip is, so if you don't have a stripper for your rose, you can just literally peel the petals off. So you can, let me take one that I haven't done this too. So you can literally just peel them off with your fingers. Be careful of any thorns. As I said, this particular bunch of roses I got really didn't have any, which was awesome. And then you could just use your snippers to literally cut off the little thorns. And even just cutting off the tip of them makes them safe to handle. So. As you keep going, you'll notice how much easier it gets to balance everything, even if you don't have a base like chicken wire in that, again, because all the flowers are starting to rest on each other, which is great. The other thing I've learned over time is to never force a flower to try and go a certain way, even if you want it to and it's not trying to go that way. Just go with it. So the next kind of filler structural flower that I use to really bulk up the arrangement is Lysianthus, which are really cool. They come with multiple blooms per one stem, which is really cool. And you can also, depending on how tall your arrangement is, you can either keep them bunched together like this, or you could cut the individual branches off, which is what we'll do because we're doing a little bit of a lower arrangement. And then for these, you're just pulling the leaves off. That's really all you have to do to make these look good. What's really cool about this particular kind of Lysianthus that I found yesterday is that it actually has multiple different hues of pink in each stem, which is so cool. Usually when you get them, they're just, one color, but this actually has multiple colors, multiple hues of pink in it, which I love. So this is what it looks like right now with just the greens and the roses. And now we'll add the Lysianthus. I also love these the little buds from the Lysianthus that aren't open yet. And in general, you'll see these on ranunculus, dahlias, all sorts of flowers. The buds are not going to open at this stage. They're going to stay closed. But I do like to use it as little kind of accents at the end of the arrangement. So I'll sometimes just put it aside. Sorry, you might be hearing some dog whimpers in the background as I do this as well, because of course our dogs want to be with us and around us wherever we are in the house, and with myself being in here and my husband in here videotaping, we kind of sequestered them off into our living room and just used like our fireplace screen to block them off, and one dog is handling that better than the other. So apologies if you're hearing whimpering, but this is quarantine life and we have to just, you know, work from home and make the best of it, right? So I'm sure everybody's going through that. I can't imagine people who are working from home right now and are used to working in an office and are having to deal with animals and kids and background noise. I'm sure everybody will be so excited to go back to their office when this is over. So again, just cutting everything at an angle and just providing some filler throughout the arrangement. It will help to stand up all the other flowers that we add after that might need a little bit more structure. The other thing is make sure that you are turning your arrangement as you go to make sure that it's looking good on all sides, especially if you're looking for it to look the same on all sides. Definitely make sure you're turning it. Since I've done this a few times, I have pretty high confidence that this is looking okay from the side you're looking at, but now the next item that I'm going to work with, so you'll see that we're working from like the hardier items down into, you know, the items that have a smaller stem or a more delicate bloom. We're gonna save for last because we don't want it to get crushed by anything. They're also more of kind of our accent flowers, so we're gonna save those for later. So the next kind of hardier bloom that I'm gonna use is these hyacinth that I found. Now they have the bulb still intact, so you could go plant it in your yard, but so once you cut it to go in your floral arrangement, so chances are you're gonna have to, you know, cut the bulb off, it's going to make these other petals fall off. So just be aware of that. You could keep these if you want to use them for extra green. I'm not gonna need to do that because my arrangement's gonna be pretty full. So these are pretty sturdy. And the nice thing is, again, they don't require a ton of prep. The only thing is they have a thick stem so that when you're putting it through chicken wire, it can be a little more tricky. I also got some white. So I'm trying to keep this mostly in kind of the pinkish color palette, but then I'm adding a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white just to help it pop, because you need a little bit of that variance to show some dimension. The other thing that you can do with your flowers, I'll definitely do this with the tulips, is kind of bunch a few together and put them in your arrangement. And that just kind of makes it look like it's, you know, a wild arrangement, kind of how it would be in nature. You have multiple blooms kind of together. This is how this is looking. So that's with the addition of the hyacinth and the lisianthus. That's how it's coming together. Definitely feels like Easter, I think. Next, I'm going to do the tulips. So again, I have a pinkish color, and then I'm adding a little bit of a yellow tulip that has a little bit of pink added to the hue. I love blooms where it ties multiple colors that you're using into one particular bloom. So this tulip, while it's pink, has a little bit of yellow, and then the yellow tulip has a little bit of pink, so it will help really tie it together. So tulips, you're going to peel like a banana. So literally just peel off the bottom. And then you can leave some of the greens around the top, or you can take them off, it's up to you. I'm gonna leave some on just because I have less greens in my arrangement. So one thing to keep in mind with tulips is that even after they're cut, they continue to grow. So they continue to grow in length and they continue to open up. So you wanna be really aware of that in your arrangement, because as the days go on, you're gonna see that your tulips keep going up while the rest of your arrangement stays down. So you may wanna start with your tulips a little bit lower, or you can always just kind of pluck them out and trim them as necessary. That also reminds me that as your arrangement goes on, if particular blooms die, make sure to just pluck them out, because the bacteria, again, from their stem is gonna affect the rest of the arrangement. So if anything dies, just pluck it out and it'll help with the rest of the arrangement. I think tulips are one of the best flowers this time of year because there's so many different colors and varieties, and you can get them anywhere. As I mentioned in our video yesterday, these are parrot tulips, which are just so stunning. They have these ruffled edges, which I just love. And see, this is the yellow tulip that has a little bit of pink on the edge, which is going to tie in all the pink that we're doing here. And I think yellow is such a nice Easter color as well. We actually have a giant Flemish rabbit who lives in our house, who we got from the Situate Animal Shelter. She won't be able to make it into this video because we had to block off the dogs. But I'm sure she'll make it into another video, or we'll have to share a picture of her. You will be stunned at her size. And she looks beautiful and fluffy and sweet. But she's actually not terribly nice, so fun fact. But she's had a hard life before us, so we let her be herself. She definitely kind of rules the house. The parrot tulips are just really doing it for me. They're so beautiful. And I love how as they open up, so I had gotten these yesterday, and so now you can already see, you know, the petals start to kind of open up. When they get fully open, they're truly unbelievable. I can't even describe it. They'll actually start to, the way I have this so tightly packed, when they get really open, they will grow up a little bit, so the bloom will kind of settle and be really opened up. This is when I also like to start paying attention to how things are falling over the sides as well of the vase. So this is where I might do some of that kind of clustering, where I kind of put a few blooms together off the side. Okay, so that's with the addition of the tulips. Next, I'm going to add some ranunculus. So when you get them, they look like this. They have a little bit of greenery that you're going to want to take off. Very delicately. Be careful because they have a pretty fragile stem. The thing you'll notice about ranunculus is they totally have a mind of their own, so they're going to go in one direction and you're not going to be able to change that direction. So again, just follow the flower and say, okay, well, this is going off this direction. I'm going to put it in the arrangement in that way. Unless you cut it shorter and kind of tuck it in, then obviously you can force it to be what you want it to be. But I like to just kind of take inspiration from the flower itself. This is, again, where it starts to get really tight because of the chicken wire. And I think it's kind of cool, too, to make it look a little imperfect and a little asymmetrical. So you see how I just let that ranunculus kind of dip off the side there? Just because it makes it look more natural and kind of organic. So I also happened to go into our yard and forage a couple things that I thought would work really well with our color palette here, which is another great tip, is to just get things from your yard or the woods, because you can find so many cool things in nature that will really add to your arrangement or could really be the bulk of your arrangement. So I have these beautiful branches from a peach tree we have in our yard that are not quite opened yet but have a beautiful pink bloom. So I'm gonna add those in. It also just gives it a much more organic look to have something like branches. And again, we're going to do it in threes so that it's an odd number. Okay. The other thing that I grabbed from our yard, which are really cool, it's called Paris. So it has these beautiful bell-shaped bulbs. So I'm just going to take some of these leaves off. I became obsessed with these when I saw them at the flower market last year and bought a bunch of them and was really excited about them because I was teaching a Easter floral arranging class, and we've only lived in our house for a couple of years, so we haven't done a ton of landscaping at this point. And I came home with all this Paris, and then it was a nice weekend, and I was in our yard, and I realized that we have a Paris bush in our yard. So, but happy to support other the people who are selling flowers. So I did my part there, that's for sure. Even though I could have just gotten them from our yard. So what I am doing here, as you can see, I'm adding a little bit more asymmetry. So I'm adding these drooping kind of elements over here so that the arrangement isn't looking too, perfect, so it looks a little bit more natural. And that's why I kind of added that drooping. And here I'm going to just take these extra little Lysianthus stems that I saved and put them in. And then last but not least, so if you haven't heard or seen yet, dyed and dried florals are having a really big moment right now. So you can get them from the floral market as a floral professional. So by all means, if when this is over, when we can get back to the flower market, if this is something people are interested in buying from me, definitely let me know. They're really cool because they stay forever, and then you could make an arrangement that's maybe, you know, using really simple blooms, and a dried dyed element can be such a fun added piece, and they never die, so it's awesome. So they also don't have to reach the water or anything like that, which is really cool, and I just think they're really fun and add cool texture. So we have these bunny tails in this fluffy kind of white color, and these pink bunny tails as well, which just seems really appropriate for Easter. And then these dried greens that have been dyed. So I'm thinking I might add a bunny tail or two. Obviously, I know you guys are not necessarily going to have these at home, but I thought I would just show you them because they're so cute. And let you know that there's something that you can get when this is all over. I definitely include them in a lot of arrangements that I make for people. And people are always really amazed at what they are, because again, it's kind of a new phenomenon to most people. And I don't add too much, just enough to kind of accent it in a few pieces. This end part is where it gets so tricky to fit things in, especially this arrangement, which is really, really full. And again, your arrangement does not need to be this full. Obviously, I went overboard because I can. But, and again, if you could get more greens, that would really help fill this out more. I used a lot of blooms because I was able to get beautiful blooms and not so much greens, which was okay by me. So that's the finished product. So a couple tips for prolonging the life of your floral arrangement. Try to keep it away from direct sunlight and also heat. Those are two things that will, you know, kill your flowers pretty quickly. You want to check the water level every day. Every time that, you know, you're cutting fresh flowers, they will take in a lot of water. So you'll be surprised tomorrow how much water your flowers will need, especially within the first couple days. So definitely check the water level every day. I just sneak my finger in the side and just feel for the water level. And then you can use a watering can like this, or just a plastic water bottle if you have that, to add some more water in the back. If you don't have any structure to the inside of your vase, like if you just did it, you know, by hand and you didn't have chicken wire or anything like that, you could actually just grab the whole floral arrangement by the hand, take it out and replace the water and add more flower food. That's an ideal way to do it, but obviously if you spent a lot of time arranging, you may not want to do that. So just adding plain water is fine. And again, as I mentioned earlier, as different flowers die, make sure to pluck them out so that they're not contaminating the rest of your floral arrangement, so that it lives as long as possible. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. We really enjoyed doing it for you. Definitely give us a follow on Instagram and Facebook to see more of what we're up to, what we're sharing. I'm sure there will be some more videos in the future, tips and tricks and so on. And we would love to see if you follow along and make your own arrangement at home. We would love to see it. So definitely tag us at Merrily Blooms. And hope you guys have a great Easter, and thank you so much for tuning in.